Kia ora tātou, nau mai haere mai, and welcome to our Palmerston City Council meeting of Tuesday the 21st of September 2021. Look, this meeting is being recorded and will be live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. The meeting obviously has been run under level 2, hence the face masks, and I'm sorry about that. And if we're a bit muffled, we'll do our best to speak clearly as possible. Social distancing is required. Mask wearing is required within this building. Now, health and safety, because we have members of the public here, health and safety procedures here is listed on the big screen there. I'm not going to go into them in detail. The fire and emergency exits are listed with the green signs. It's a non-smoking facility. Toilets in the lobby as you entered, and there is a defibrillator if there is needed in the ground floor foyer. Councillors online, and we have councillors Rachel Bowen, Leonie Harpiter, Karen Naylor, Bruno Petrinas, Renee Dingwell, Lorna Johnson, Susan Beattie, and Vaughan Dennison will be joining us a little bit later. Councillors, if you could put your hand up if you wish to ask a question, and cast your vote in the chat box, please. Right. We'll go through our order of paper, councillors. So, number one there is apologies, and I have no apologies other than lateness from Councillor Dennison, so I might put that in, please. And I'll move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And we'll do that with a show of hands, and you'll have to vote online to my colleagues online. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstain? That's passed unanimously, thank you. We have no additional items. There's no declarations of interest. And we now get on to the main order of business, which is the representation review and hearing of submissions. And that's on page 7. And we have a summary of submissions from the consultation that has occurred. It's a memo presented from our governance manager, Hera. I'll take it as being read. Okay. Okay. Okay, we're going to do the submissions first. So we have, in the order of submissions, we have Thomas Goff. Is he here? No. But we have Miko Kirschbaum. Miko, would you like, if it's okay, we'll bring you forward if that's okay? Thank you. Sorry, Miko. I've just been given some last-minute advice. If we could go back to what's on screen, we will be passing this first. So this is that Council hears a submission from presenters who indicated their wish to be heard. In support of the submission, we note that the procedure of hearing of submissions as described in the procedure sheet. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any questions or comments? Being none, we will vote again. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstain? It is passed. Thank you. My apologies, Miko. We're now to you.
Okay, start again. And I got the microphone on this time. It's better. So thank you for the opportunity to address you here today. It's about the review, and I'm going to present the Buchanan application as an alternative way of conducting the electoral system, and I will briefly outline the advantages and then go through explaining how it can work in practice. Could we have next slide, please? So on the key questions that were asked in the review, with the system, yes, 15 councillors, we can keep that, that's great. Election at large, there are two aspects to it. Representation of diversity, yes, we want to keep that, and as such, it's the advantage of the 15 councillors. But we also want to have district representation. Can we have both? Community boards, it clearly expresses that the community, a lot of people feel that there needs to be more district representation, but community boards is probably not the best way of implementing that. So district representation, yes, but not through community boards. Maori wards, I would be in favor of that, and I think that's a great initiative. Next page, please. But there are other considerations that are not listed here. There's the question of fairness. As it is proposed in the outline, with 2 councillors elected for a Maori ward and the rest at large, does it give us fairness? Are all voters represented in appropriate numbers? And does it also, for the Maori representatives, does it give adequate fairness of their representation of a diversity of views within that? Well, it's questionable. Hang on, sorry, we're not going through this. Flexibility, very important. Do voters have the flexibility to choose how they want to vote? Maori wards, as proposed with 2 wards, it does not give us that. There's no option for district representation, so we're clearly missing out on that aspect. There is the question of favoritism. Does it incur any, is there any favoritism involved in having Maori wards but not for other sections of the community? That's both a real favoritism and is there a perceived bias or favoritism? And that's clearly a problem and I think underlying a fair bit of the opposition to Maori wards that's expressed by some people. Next one, please. What I'm proposing as a solution to all these various issues and problems is a Buchanan application. It was developed by, in Canberra, ACT in Australia, as part of a proportional representation society deliberations a few decades ago. Ian Buchanan came up with this proposal. Technically, it is just follows exactly the same rules as currently with a 15-member single transferable vote. So technically, it's no real issue. But the novelty comes about purely through the placement of the candidates' names on the ballot paper. It's only a very small change, but it has powerful consequences. Go next page, please. So I propose that we would subdivide Palmerston North into different districts. An obvious separation would be into northwest, northeast, west, and east. So I wasn't imaginative to come up with better names. And a rural or a country named electorate to cover the rest, and of course a Maori ward. So it would give us 6 districts. The next one, please. And candidates would nominate for one of these districts. Now, I've taken the liberty of subdividing councillors for different districts. I don't know your personal associations with particular districts, whether this is appropriate. So this is just an example how it could be divided. So at the next election, people would nominate for a particular district, and they would, if elected, would then be identified as being either the Maori councillor or a Western District councillor or whatever district people would have nominated for and then successfully been elected. So next page, please. And the key part now is on the ballot paper. So instead of listing all candidates at random, we would have a division where the candidates from a district like in this case, the example of a Maori ward, would be listed at the top of the ballot paper, followed by a small dashed line, and then all other candidates would be randomly listed underneath it. And voters can vote for any of the candidates in any order. So that is the essential part that gives us the best of both worlds. Gives the identification of candidates with a district. They get the advantage of being listed on top of the list, but the flexibility is there for voters to vote whichever way they want to. Go next page, please. So ballot papers would look like that. So for Maori ward, Maori candidates at the top, everybody else underneath it, and the same for all the other districts. And voters from those respective districts would receive the ballot paper that is printed for their district. Important that the names of all candidates need to be randomized, both above the dashed line and below the dashed line, but that's really technically the only thing that needs to be done in conduct of the election. I find it difficult to breathe with the mask on. I've also given you a handout which sort of partly summarizes what my presentation is about, and it gives these ballot papers in there as well. And I invite you to just have a play with it and just see how you would vote with it to get a feeling for how it would work in actual practice. Or give it to one of your friends and spend 1 minute to explain how it works and let them fill it in and see to what extent it does reflect, that people get the hang of it, how it's supposed to work, and then see how different voting patterns may emerge based on different preferences of different voters. Go to the next page, please. So voters might vote like this. This is an example of a ballot paper for the Maori ward. Voters may choose to give a strict Maori preference, just stick with the 5 Maori candidates. And incidentally, to preempt any question, I mean, there's no limit to the number of candidates that can nominate for a district. I've just illustrated here with 5 per district, but it works really with any number. So voters, a particular voter may choose to only vote for the Maori voters and really be very strict in their allegiance. Or a voter who also receives the Maori ballot paper, but in this particular case may show absolutely no Maori preference. Nominate their preferences, whomever they know for on the council. That may include a few Maoris at some lower preference or not, but they really completely disregard that, the placement of the ballot papers. Or there may be mixed preference. The voters may give some preference to Maori candidates whom they are familiar with, find credible, but then go to other candidates whom they know, to other walks of life and so on, may come back to Maori preferences, but it's really completely at the discretion of individual voters as to where they see their preferences and act accordingly. That's the essential flexibility that it allows. And next slide, please. So at the end of the voting process, each candidate would receive a number of votes, and I've shown here a line that roughly indicates, or technically indicates, which votes have been received from voters from their own district, a small dashed line on each bar, and then votes that have been received from voters outside their district. So the first candidate, for example, has got some Maori votes in this case, but has got a broad popularity from across the electorate, and that's given that voter such a large vote to elevate them to above the quota. And you can see in different patterns for the different districts, reflecting how well candidates are known locally, how much door knocking they've done there, or how their they're perceived to have high or low credibility in their district. Next part, please. So in this case, we have two candidates that on first preferences already were above the required quota. We then need to distribute preferences. Next, forward, please. So we may expect that votes received from within the district would largely be, their preferences would largely flow to other people in the districts. Of course, it's up to the discretion of the individual voters. This is just some broad indication. And next, please. And votes that are received from the general voter population, because it may be Greens candidate, or might be a Labour candidate, or somebody with particular, a young person or an older representative. Whatever has made that particular candidate popular may then flow on to other candidates of a similar political persuasion or similar or other strong credibility from other districts. Again, completely up to the discretion of individual voters, but we might expect to find a pattern like that. So this is it, basically. And next one, please. And the Buchanan application essentially achieves all these stated aims. Allows us to allow 15 councillors at large, or any number really, there's no restriction on that. It does give us meaningful community representation, allows a ready implementation of Maori wards, essentially in parallel with district representation, treated in the same way. It will obviously lead to a fairness, because each person elected, no matter what district they represent, requires the same number of votes after preferences. It allows maximum flexibility. Voters can choose wherever they see their priorities, district, political allegiance, wherever. And I think that's a very important aim. We don't want to tell voters whom they can vote for, but let voters decide how they want to vote, how they see their preferences. It's relatively easy to implement. Technically, it's exactly the same process as currently, just the printing of ballot papers.
Thank you, Miko. I've let you go over quite a bit in terms of time, so if we could wrap up, thank you.
This is the last 2 points. So there's no favoritism involved in implementing that, and very importantly, there's a clear, it's clearly no bias and no favoritism. So thank you very much, and my presentation, and thank you for letting me go over time.
Thank you, Miko. We do have a couple of questions, but what I'll let the councillors do is perhaps just contact you online. They have your details in the submission. Okay. But thank you for, we've gone well over, so thank you for your submission. We don't have a Mr. Goff here? No. Okay. Thank you, Miko. Our next submitter in order here is Jean Hera. So welcome, Jean. And Jean is on page 54 of our submissions. Jean, you're well known to us. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. This is on. You can hear me. Very strange doing this with masks on. I guess firstly, just want to commend Council for supporting Māori wards. This is something our group has been a long supporter for. So great that this will be coming in for the next election. So we support a structure that will support that initiative. So one that will allow for at least the 2 Māori ward seats. We see this establishment of Māori wards as a key step towards honouring Te Tiriti o Waitangi and decolonisation. So that was our primary focus, but and we see it as really important for the inclusion of tikanga and maturanga Māori as a very important part of structures and processes for council. And good to see that mana whenua have been involved in a consultation, but it would have been interesting to hear a bit more about what they had put forward. So I didn't actually read about that other than the naming of the wards. We would like to challenge the assertion that Palmerston North is one large community of interest. We work a lot with low-income communities and, sorry, I'm puffing with this mask on. I walked here, that might not have been a great idea. Yeah, and I think it's really important that that is recognised. And in a way, if we had the geographic wards, it would be better balanced with the two Māori wards, so you wouldn't have a situation where most people are voting for 13 councillors and a mayor, with the Māori wards voting for 2 and a mayor. So we would like consideration given to that. I know it's not popular with council, but just putting that forward. In terms of community boards, I don't know that they worked well in the past, but we do need some sort of mechanism so that the voices of those less likely to be heard are heard, and the more powerful voices are managed. So I guess that's the gist of what we want to put forward.
Thank you, Jean. All right, I'll open it up for any questions. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Jean, for the presentation to us. I guess I'm trying to extend from your point around fairness between 2 seats in a Māori ward and a desire for wards in the general ward or subdivision into wards, further wards there. Is your view then around fairness that we would need to have a number of wards that would give us 2 seats in each of those non-Māori wards as well, or would you be comfortable with larger wards there?
I mean, that's how it used to work. And I know there was, it was contentious, the move away from the geographic wards. So this new structure, it makes sense in terms of equity. And also I think it does support low-income communities where they can connect more easily with their local representatives.
So just so that I've got that clear, you wouldn't be comfortable with splitting the 13 into, say, 7 and 6. What you would like to see is the 13 split into a number that are either, say, 2 or 3 seats per ward.
I mean, I don't have any strong view on that. I mean, it needs to be something that works. But, yeah, a move in that direction would be, I think, a good idea. And I know that there was a lot of support to retain that geographic approach when the change was made.
Right, thank you.
So I'm not saying exactly how it should look like. I'm just putting forward that kind of makes sense in this new structure.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Kia ora, Jen.
Kia ora.
I just wondered about your support for Māori wards and in terms of the number of councillors in a Māori ward. So you've said in your submission that you support the structure that allows for the change to 2 councillor positions for the Māori ward. Is there a particular reason why you think that 2 is better than 1?
Very definitely, better representation for a start, but also a more supportive environment for the establishment process. I think it's really good to have a colleague, that you can connect with when you've got a particular role and focus. So for that reason, I think, I guess there's a long history of, the one representative being quite isolated, and their voice is not as strong and they're not as confident, but with 2, I think that really assists that. More confidence, stronger voice.
Thank you, that's great.
Any more questions, councillors? There being none, thank you, Jean, as always. Thank you for your submission.
pleasure.
And we will take everything into account there. Thank you.
Kia ora.
All right. Councillors, we move online now to Gavin Lees. And Gavin, your submission's on page 97 of our papers. Gavin, the screen is yours. You'll need to unmute, Gavin. No, Gavin, you'll need to unmute. It should be at the bottom of the screen there, or the top of the screen.
Is that better?
That's better. Well done.
Oh, thank you. Technology. I've been being old, male, stale and pale. I have problems with technology. Anyway, Your Worship, Councillors, thank you for this opportunity to present to you. First of all, just a point of clarification, the term when I use at large, I'm referring to councillors that are elected by everybody, not just those from a ward. Because I know in the original proposal, the term at large is referred to inside the general ward. In preparing the submission, there were three key principles that I thought need to be considered. We need to identify communities of interest. We need to look at effective representation and fair representation. How those principles are achieved, of course, is not an exact science, and I'm sure that it would be very subjective in a lot of decision-making areas. But I believe that the proposed model that you put out for consultation actually violates the last two principles, in particular, the question of fair representation. What we actually have at present is a system that by default will effectively disenfranchise a minority of electors. That is, it will stop them from voting for a majority of councillors. And I think that runs a risk of increasing further disenchantment with local government, something that's all too prevalent at present, turnouts, etc. In my submission, I proposed increasing the equality of votes by having a number of councillors elected at large, that is by everybody. This gives voters an increased say, especially those in the smaller wards, that is the proposed Maori ward. At-large councillors allow the community as a whole to have a say in who gets on council, not limiting some votes to a minority say as to who is elected. In my submission, I talked about having 6 and 7 and things like that, and you can all read that. However, having thought about it since then, if it is to be fair, one would argue that if 15 councillors, the Maori ward has 2 representatives, then the general ward should also have 2, with a balance of 13 elected at large. But I mean, this is where it becomes subjective. And I don't envy the decision you're going to have to make. But what I'm saying is you need to look at some way in which there is actually going to be a balance that comes through. I also recognise that there is an antipathy towards wards in general, and that having 2 wards is probably, the general and the Maori ward, is probably closer to the way people feel, because we know the problems we had with wards in the past. However, I'm reminded of a quote from David Longy, the late David Longy, when discussing the initial proposal to changing our electoral system back in '87. He said, having an electoral system devised by politicians is like having an intersection designed by panel beaters. Stand back and wait for the crash. What I'm saying is, if the system is not fair, then there's going to be a crash sooner rather than later. So if I had to sum up, what I'm saying is equality and fairness needs to be recognised. And it's interesting, I found out the other day that the mayors of both the New Plymouth District Council and the Stratford District Council are now asking their councillors to consider the option of electing councillors at large, so that they're trying to provide a more balanced system that creates a more equitable and fair system. I mean, obviously, probably everybody having wards with the same number of councillors is the fairest, but that's not going to happen. We're not going to see wards. So basically, I'm saying to you, look at some way that is going to be fair and equitable, to everybody. So I just leave it up to you to make your decision. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Gavin. Are there any questions? Councillor Barrett.
Hi, Gavin. Thank you for your very well-humoured submission and presentation thereof. Just wanted, I guess for those of us that perhaps were less connected to local government during the time when there were wards in Palmerston North, you said you referred sort of generically to issues during that time. Would you be able to expand on that a little bit for us to understand what, in your view, some of the issues were at that time?
Okay, I mean, to declare an interest, I didn't agree with the ward system as it was. I was a supporter of Brian Booth's communities of interest, which would have had about 13 wards, not the half dozen or so that we had. So, I'm not probably the best person to actually answer your question, Brett, in that sense. The issue that most people, I think, faced was you had the city was divided in the quadrants around the square. Now, there weren't communities of interest in that. In the Milson area, I think you had 4 councillors from memory. In Takaro, you had 3. Awapuni, you had 3. Hokowhitu had 3. There was 1 from Ashurst and 1 from the rural area, I think. Now, one of the arguments people were saying is, oh, we can only vote for 3 councillors, or we can only vote for 4 councillors. You've got 15 around the table. How come I can only vote for 3? It was fair, it was equitable, but people didn't see it as being fair because they could only vote for 3 or 4 in their ward. So when the last review came through, and I was actually overseas at the time, of course, abolishing the wards meant everybody could vote for everybody. And that was seen as being fair and equitable. It is. However, you're now coming back to a ward situation whereby you're creating the same issue that was there, where councillors in a ward can only vote for those councillors. And that raises a whole range of issues in terms of equity and fairness. You can go and divide the city into wards and find some way of doing it, and good luck to you for trying to do that. I think, personally, I would have 2 in a general ward, 2 in a Murray ward, and everybody else elected at large. But somehow that doesn't seem right for 80-odd% of the population inside a ward electing 2. So this is where it's subjective. So whether you had 6 in the ward and then 7 at large, so that gives a sort of 13 versus 9 scenario, which is not probably quite fair. But the other alternative is you could divide the general ward into 2, a Palmerston North East and a Palmerston North West, or Palmerston North North, or something like that, and have 3 in each one of them. But then you're going back to the wards again. So, I'm not going to give you an answer because it's subjective, and that's part of the issue.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Gavin. So what I take from that is that your principal example of issues that were present at the time of wards was less so to do around the council table and how those ward elected councillors operated together, and more to do with the actual election process. Is that a fair comment?
I would say yes, although having said that, for some people who were around the council table at the time may remember there were 1 or 2 councillors who got on through the ward system. I think the phrase by the skin of their teeth might have been probably the closest way of doing it, and probably weren't the most, that's not the right word, team player. They probably weren't the best team player you've probably had either. Now, somebody once said to me, why have we got so many morons on the council? And I said that morons are entitled to be represented on the council. And the trouble was with wards, you tend to throw up the odd little... I spent 10 years in Australia and I saw what their system did with throwing up some real, very interesting candidates. Some who became Prime Minister of Australia, but hey, that's another story.
Thanks, Gavin.
Sorry, Tony.
I think that clarifies things well enough. Thank you, Gavin.
All right, no further questions? Great, thanks, Gavin. Thank you for your submission and hanging on online for us. Thank you. All right, move to we haven't got Mr. Goff, he's not here, no. Right, we go down to our last submitter here today, in person is Julia Manson. Julia, it's on page 104 of our submissions.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have to admit I didn't look into the ins and outs of things, and I submitted as I felt, as a Māori woman. And as you'll notice, all those areas there that I have spoken about, I considered to be racist. Due to 2 more seats allocated, it is proposed that an increase to 15 councillors are needed on the council to represent 80,000 people, a ratio of around 5,500. Auckland, I believe, has 20 councillors for over 1 million people, and that's a ratio of approximately 50,000 per councillor. I feel that we are totally overrepresented in the council with the number of people. In order to keep the number of councillors to an acceptable number per voting population in Palmerston North, would it not have been better to reduce the numbers instead of increasing them? Whilst I acknowledge that this government has mandated that Māori representation is required, it is sad to think that equal opportunity to run for council has been negated and special advantage has been created. And for me, that is shame on us. All citizens in a city have the right to vote for a person on equal terms. I have to say, not so long ago, a gentleman from the Congo ran as an equal for council and was elected. I say no to 15 councillors. My interpretation of the geographical wards is that no councillor is actually responsible for any ward within the city boundaries. Does this mean that any councillor can go into any ward at any time and override any other councillor's word? The concept of no solid structure within the council itself and no people's voices leads to distrust, disillusionment and disdain within the people. And the 2 Maori councillors, where will they fit? Will they have a ward? Which ward? Where will their wards be? Will they have to cover the whole city? Because Māori live throughout the whole city. I shudder to think. And I believe that we do need geographical wards. My interpretation of community boards, once again, that no councillor is responsible for any board. Does this mean that no councillor will be responsible for any board? Again, without a solid structure within the council and the responsibilities for the councillors, we have nothing but mayhem. Will Maori pick and choose what boards they want to go on to? Will the workload be equal? Will any councillors voted in from the general ward, from the general role, be able to pick and choose what boards they want to go on to? Will the councillors who are placed onto a board have the real qualifications to give justice to that board? Community boards are the people's voice, and without proper representation from the council, this results once again in disillusionment and distrust. I say we need community boards. And in closing, whilst the country's general election has the general role and the Māori role, each electorate has their given area of responsibility and representation, and every person running for that particular seat knows exactly who they are going to represent, where the responsibilities lie, what their job entails, and when they are required to fulfil their duties. Councils are different. Whilst we have wards, these wards have only 1 seat. When you get 2 extra seats with nowhere to go to, what does this create? Unrest and the inability to govern as a council. The action of this government has created division and upset within the population, and this needs to stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. We have a question. Councillor Naylor, online.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Julia, for your submission. You suggested that we are overrepresented with 15 councillors, and I'm just wondering how many councillors do you think we should have?
I would suggest around about 8.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Julia, for your presentation or submission. On one hand, you are submitting to reduce the number of councillors. I guess you want to reduce the amount of money we are spending on councillors. Is that the reason to reduce the number?
No, I just don't believe that we need to have 15.
And the
I
other
believe-
hand,
oh, sorry.
you are submitting for more community boards. So will they be persons or that will increase the number of people as well?
My feeling on the boards is that if we're going to have representation from the City Council on the boards, we need to have 1 or 2 particular people that will attend to that board at all times, instead of going, oh no, I want to go today. Oh no, I can't make it today, you go today. I want people to be able to come back around the table and know exactly what they're talking about. The people that are in the, that you go to the board for, I want them to be able to be properly represented, because it is the people that own the board. It is the people that own the council. And the way this thing is now, to me, it has bore from a racist, what's the word? It's born out of giving special privilege to those with a different coloured skin and a different race. When to me, my dad always told me, you stand in a line on the straight line and you run the race as an equal.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, no more questions. Okay, thank you, Julia.
Thank you very
your-
much,
your
people.
submission. All right, councillors. I don't think Mr. Goff is here. I've asked about 3 or 4 times. No, he's not. All right, we now go to number 5, which is our representation review summary report. It's a memo from our governance manager, Hera, and it's on page 135 of your papers. Hannah?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few comments, councillors. There's a short paper before you. It's simply a summary of the submissions that are in your papers. The submissions, not just from those that have been heard today, but from all submitters. Just one comment that I would like to make, unless there are any questions, is that there has been 2 small changes since the papers were first published. So on page 138 of your papers, summary submissions number 4, you have 81 submissions were received. After publication, one of our submitters asked that their submission be removed, so you'll note that's number 73 is missing. That's on purpose. The other change is in the summary table, and one of the submitters, submitter number 65, requested in writing that their position on the number of councillors be changed in the record. So changed to support the number of councillors at 15. So that means the summary table will need to be adjusted, and it will be adjusted in your papers that come to you on the 6th of October. But for now, there were 48 people in support of 15 councillors, 27 in opposition, making a total of 80. At large, there were 51 in support, making the total of 80, and retaining, having no community boards, 54 in support, making a total of 80.
Okay, any questions? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Hannah, for the report. Just wanted to pick up around the next steps where it refers to further analysis, and I suppose some of the analysis is quite straightforward. It's the yes/no questions, but was interested, for example, in the first submitter that we heard this morning, presenting perhaps quite what might seem a novel way, but a way that could potentially resolve some of that tension between communities of interest and geographic communities if you sort of work through that example. Just wondering, in those cases, sort of what further analysis might happen and what information and options might not necessarily develop in this round, but start to feed into future thinking.
All of the comments of all of the submitters will be taken into account, and the plan for the paper that's coming on the 6th of October is that there will be comments from officers towards the specific alternatives that have been offered by submitters.
Thank you. So to clarify then, in cases beyond that, there isn't intended further follow-up at this point?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand
Sorry.
where you're going, Councillor.
In cases beyond the yes, no to the 15, the yes, no to community boards, do I understand from your answer that there isn't at this stage any further sort of follow-up around other options that might have sat outside of those yes, no framings?
At this point in the representation review, you'll remember that you made the decision, the council made the decision for Māori wards in April, so that decision has been made for the next 2 local elections. Towards the electoral system, that decision was made in September the year prior, from my memory. And maybe that date's not quite accurate, sorry. But it was made prior to that, and again, to apply for the next 2 elections. So it would, in order to consider for example, to look at the electoral system again, that would need, a resolution of council to bring that back to the table. There's no intention of doing that outside of the 6-year timeframe at this point.
Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Mayor.
Online, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Hannah. I just had a question about when you're reporting the numbers, these number opposed, these number in support. Reading through the submissions, and I didn't count, but it seemed to me that there was a significant proportion of those who opposed 15 councillors who gave as a reason for their opposition that it would save money on salaries. Now, as we know, that's not the case. So when we're just looking at straight yeses and nos, it's hard to know whether those people who oppose 15 councillors would continue to oppose 15 councillors if they understood that it wasn't actually a money saving. So can we expect some analysis of that in the final report? Another issue that struck me was there was a lot of commentary about Māori wards, which is a decision that's already been taken and not up for a change at this point. So what officer comment can we expect around submissions that were, I suppose, either out of scope or based on a false premise?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the answer is yes, you can expect that those numbers will be separated out in the analysis.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions? There being none? All right, we'll move now to putting the recommendation up, please. And the recommendation to council around the representation review of 2021 and a summary of submissions and consultation at the memo, representation review 2021, summary of submissions and consultation presented to council on the 21st of September 2021 be received. I'm quite happy to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it for any comments. There being none, right, we'll do this with, we'll do this with vote of hands. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Abstain? It is passed unanimously. Thank you. Right. We now go through to confirming the minutes, and if councillors are okay with this, if I don't hear otherwise, we'll look to move both part 1 and part 2 together. And I'm getting nodding heads, so that's good. So we have the minutes of public and confidential 1st of September 2021 minutes, the minutes of the ordinary meeting of 1 September public and confidential be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any matters arising. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question. In the minutes, there's additional commentary as to why elected members are leaving the meeting, and I just wondered what, that's a change from how we have, I guess, recorded minutes in the past.
Can you give me an example?
Councillor Renee Dingle left the meeting due to a connectivity issue. We've never done that before. Is that due to alert levels? What premise are we doing that in? Is that something that we're going to do ongoing, or?
Through Mr. Mayor, comment. So you'll remember that when we revised the standing orders earlier in this term, we added a whole chapter on digital participation, expecting quite a lot from the chair if a meeting had to be adjourned because of connectivity, etc., etc. So we thought it was reasonable to make a comment of that nature.
Okay. No other matters arising? All right, we'll do this with a show of hands. All those in favour? Against? Abstain? Okay, so we've got 15 for, and we've got an abstention from Councillor Petrinas. Thank you. Sorry, 14. Right, we'll now move to number 7 on our agenda, and it is the work schedule for September, page 155. And I will look to move that council work schedule, that the council receives its work schedule dated September 2021, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, appreciating that sometimes within these COVID levels that we have moved things back into council, so it is a little bit of a moving target. Are there any comments to the work schedule? There being none, we'll look to vote with a show of hands. Against? Abstain? That's passed unanimously, thank you. So councillors, we now go to our recommendations from committee meetings, and we have our Planning and Strategy Committee meeting of the 8th of September, so I'll ask the Chair to speak to this. Over to you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to present the Part 1 Public Planning and Strategy Committee recommendation from the 8th of September 2021 meeting.
Okay, and seconded by Councillor Hancock. All right, I'll open it up for, if we could just, oh, sorry, she's moved. Okay, I'll open it up for any comments or questions on that. Online, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, could I ask what has happened to the paper on the community support and funding policy, or did that just have delegated authority from the committee?
No, I'll get the governance manager to comment on that.
I'm happy to speak to that, Councillor Johnson. Hannah here. We have 2 other recommendations from the Planning and Strategy Committee to come to the 6th of October meeting. What we're doing with that policy paper that you're referring to is we're going to bring the entire paper back to the council so they can see all of the amendments that were asked for in one go. They can see the policy as a whole before passing it on our normal scheduled meeting of 6th of October.
Right, so why is this recommendation coming then separately from the others from that meeting?
Thank you for your question. So as this was, this is not an extraordinary meeting, it's a scheduled one. So we did bring through this recommendation simply so we could get the consultation process underway.
Well, would not the same argument then apply to the community support and funding policy?
It would, through you, Mr. Mayor, it would if there were not so many changes that needed to be made in the interim, just in the short turnaround between the committee dates.
I mean, this is quite unusual to have a recommendation from committee that's been amended, not then be presented at the council meeting for adoption. The changes that were made were through amendment. I'm not aware of any other changes. This seems to be a bit of a change in process, and I'm a little bit concerned about it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there's no change in process. The committee recommendations in full will still come through to the next council meeting for adoption. It's just the timing of we're having an extra council meeting in the in-between.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but the arguments that you're giving me for this particular item to come today, because it needs to go out for consultation, I think apply to the other policy in the same way. And I'm not, I guess this is more of a comment, so I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, but I'm not convinced that the delay is due to the degree of the changes, because there were some amendments made, but we've made amendments to policy before, and the policy has still come to council for adoption. So I'll just leave it there. I think I've made my point.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I have a degree of sympathy with you as well, because I was in the same boat even. But it's coming back to another. When is it coming back, Hannah?
The 6th of October, the next council meeting, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, we've got the recommendation there. No further comments or questions to officers. There being none, we will vote. All those in favour? Against? Abstain?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just tuned in. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor, for joining the end of the meeting. So we've passed that unanimously. Thank you. Councillors, that is our meeting done. So kia ora, everybody. Thank you for participating. And we will adjourn for a cup of coffee. Thank you to everybody online as well. Good morning.
Thank you.
And for